class of 2020, welcome. We're glad that you have tuned in and that you're a part of this. We want to say welcome to the family members and friends who may be watching this as well. I want to say congratulations, class. You've made it to the end of your formal schooling. You've completed primary and secondary school. You've completed 12 grades, kindergarten, and for many of you, pre-kindergarten. That would be 14 years for some of you that are slow in math. Hey, but we're glad you're here, and we're so glad that you're graduating this year. You know, you've been through a lot as a graduating class. Here's some of the highlights of the things that you have been through together. You grew up on things like Peppa Pig, Jumperoo, and VTech toys. Highlights of your adventure include fidget spinners. Do you remember those? How many of you got in trouble with those in class? You've watched the original Frozen and Let It Go with Elsa. You've watched Dude Perfect blow up YouTube many times. Baby Shark, do. You've endured these things and grown up on them. You've watched and listened to things like One Direction, Minecraft, Cardi B, Adele, and Fortnite. While many of you may be feeling a little bit disappointed, I want to encourage you. You grew up and were a child during the Great Recession of 2008, and for almost all of you, I would imagine that's a very distant memory if you remember anything about it at all. You've been through multiple tornadoes here locally and disaster recoveries and many things stateside and nationally and internationally as well. While you may be feeling a little bit disappointed today and with unmet expectations of things like missed proms, maybe things like you missed your senior pranks or other things like you've missed your senior skip days, although what you could say is that for you guys, you probably have the record for the most number of senior skip days of any class. But you've endured. You've been through it all, and you've survived it. Well, my name is Bobby Fleck. I'm the Director of Communications and Connections here at Ringgold United Methodist Church, and today I want to offer you a little bit of hindsight. That's a word I want you to keep in mind as we talk together today. I want to say that I'm honored and privileged to be able to share with you. Thank you for inviting me to participate with you in this way. It's quite an honor and a blessing for me. God bless you guys. I want to ask you to lean in a little bit with me and participate with me as we share a word of hindsight together. You know, I can identify a little bit with what you guys are going through right now. Obviously, I can identify with you personally as I'm a dad of triplet 7-year-old girls. Yes, I said that right. I'm the father of triplet 7-year-old, almost 8-year-old girls that attend Ringgold Primary School. We're excited to be able to parent and to be blessed with these incredible blessings of triplets, but right now it's been hard for us personally, just like it's been a difficult transition for many of you. Kudos to all the teachers out there as well for adapting almost flawlessly and seamlessly without even hesitation in this time and figuring out a way to do education differently. You guys should thank your teachers, by the way. They made it possible for you to graduate even in this time. Not only am I personally trying to survive this and endure and be a dad in this time, I've also got some previous history of being able to endure some difficult times, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about that at this time. When I was a 9th grader at Northside High School in Warner Robins, Georgia, that's kind of in the middle part of Georgia, an incredible thing happened in my life in the period of 6 months. I endured probably the greatest crisis of my life, but also one of the biggest triumphs and one of the greatest blessings of my life. First, let me tell you about the tragedy. Early on a Sunday morning, July 2nd, in fact, of 2000, I was awakened by my mom suddenly in the morning, really early. We were actually going to go to church that morning. She woke me up, shook me in the bed, and she said to me these words that still haunt me today as I think about it. And she shook me and said, "Bobby, I think your dad is dead." She was on the phone. I really couldn't quite understand what was going on because a little bit foggy and wondering and worried about, well, what is she talking about? We're supposed to do some stuff today, and we've got things going on. It just wasn't quite registering. I'm an only child, by the way, so that was my mom awakening me because she needed help to be able to figure out what to do. Sure enough, I went into my dad's room, and his lips were already blue where he had died in the middle of the night from a brain aneurysm, in fact, and it killed him instantly. My life was forever changed from that moment and has completely changed me into really to who I am and affected every part of my being today. Tragic moment in my life there for sure. You're really never really ready for moments like that. I grieved and struggled through the loss of my dad, and in some ways I'm still grieving through that today. You never really get over things like that, and you're sure never really prepared for those kind of moments of losing your dad, especially as a teenager. And you weren't really ready to graduate in circumstances like this either, were you? You didn't prepare for this. You didn't plan for this. You definitely didn't desire for these things to be happening the way they are, and yet here you are in this time, in these moments. I told you there's a moment in time also within this same 6-month span that I experienced probably one of the greatest victories, one of the greatest triumphs of my life, and I'd like to tell you about that as well. A couple of months before my dad passed in April 22nd, I was on a trip with my high school band where I played bari sax, actually. Shout out to all the band nerds out there. I actually marched bari sax, and I got to go on a tour in Europe as well, which was pretty cool during high school with my bari sax. On that trip, my section leader late one night came over to my hotel room and said that he needed to talk to me. And what he began to do is he began to explain to me God's incredible love for my life and how much God cared for me, and God had a plan for my life. And you could see like this was before this stuff happened with my dad, but I was in a really desperate place as a teenager. And in fact, I sort of screamed out loud one day and I said, God, if you're real, show me. Give me a sign. Make me know that you exist. Make me know that you're real. And sure enough, this time happened where my section leader, Garland Jarman, actually came to me and began to tell me about God's love. And, I began to cry and I began to weep. And I realized that what I was doing was not what was best for my life, and that God really did love me. And this thing that I had been running from for so long really was what I needed in my life. And so God's love began to envelop me like a warm blanket just taken right out of the dryer. You know that feeling? God's love just embraced me and I could just feel it. And man, it was just so comforting in that time and in that moment. And I knew that God cared for me and God wanted me to be a part of his plan, and God wanted me to invite him into my life. And so I did that in that time, and really because of that, my entire life was changed as well. What's really cool is that happened a couple of months before my dad passed in July, so we went from April to July. Really wasn't ready, obviously, for my dad to pass, but because of what God had begun to do in my life, I was a little bit more prepared and a little bit more ready. In that time where I was grieving through the tragedy of losing my dad, God drew near to me. God drew near to me in a way that I cannot really explain, other than to say that God was closer to me and closer to me than anything else in my life, and giving me peace and comfort in the midst of it all. And it really changed my entire perspective and helped me through that in so many ways. Fast forward a couple of months after that, God began to speak to me and began to tell me that what I was doing in my life and the path that I was going down was not ultimately what God wanted for me. And you see, I really wanted to be like a performance musician or like a studio musician and get paid to do those kinds of things. But God began to share with me that really he had a different purpose for my life. And God still uses music in my life today to be able to speak and to be able to minister to people and really give glory to God. I still play guitar and that sort of thing. But God called me to be a pastor in that time, And if I wasn't ready for that, and if I wasn't paying attention in the midst of this tragedy, I don't think I would have heard God's voice. No, I don't think God caused that. I don't think God made that happen by any means. But God used that deep tragedy in my life to bring about incredible good, to bring about his plan and to be able to show me what he wanted for my life. I turned to God in that time, and God comforted me deeply and spoke to me. There's another story that I want to tell you, another example about someone who really overcame adversity, and let's speak about that a little bit in this time. This guy was dealt some ridiculous circumstances that seem a little bit like out of a movie, in fact. That they were way less than he expected or desired for himself, and way worse than even what we're experiencing now in 2020. And yet in the midst of all this, great things were done. Amazing things happened because of this story. And it's more than just story. This is history. This happened. And so you may know a little bit about this man's story. His name is Joseph. This is the Joseph in the Old Testament. He had 11 brothers. But he was his father's favorite son. You may know him as the dude that received the coat of many colors from his father. This flashy robe made him an easy target of ridicule and teasing from his brothers. One day they took this teasing way too far, and they had a series of crazy ideas. It actually started from the most ridiculous to the least ridiculous. One of the brothers had an idea because of this jealousy to kill his brother. All right? Crazy idea. Another brother said, no, let's don't do that. Let's throw him into a pit and put blood on this coat and then take it back to our dad and tell him that he was eaten by an animal. And another one said, no, let's don't do that. Let's don't leave him for dead. Let's actually just sell him into slavery to a wandering trader. And sure enough, that's what happened. A wandering trader passed them, and they sold their brother, the favored brother, into slavery. This merchant then took Joseph down to Egypt from Israel and then sold Joseph to a guy named Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Joseph wasn't prepared by any means to be betrayed by his brothers, and no one could have been, right? Through a series of crazier events, Joseph rises to a prominent role in Potiphar's house. Potiphar becomes jealous of Joseph, just like Joseph's brothers had become previously, and he concocts a scheme to get Joseph thrown into prison. Joseph's situation goes from bad to worse, from a slave to a prisoner, in which he was not ready. Joseph was desperate. He was quarantined from life itself, but instead of wallowing in the dejection and in the desperate times of these circumstances, Joseph pays attention to what's going on, and he actually interprets a couple of dreams for some of the prisoners, which Pharaoh eventually discovers and asks Joseph to interpret a dream that Pharaoh had as well. Joseph correctly interprets this dream, which is pretty incredible, that ends up predicting that Egypt is about to undergo a massive famine, one of which they would have never experienced before, a famine that would last several years. And in this dream, Joseph interprets that they need to prepare as a country to save up during the times of plenty and harvest for the times of famine and where there would not be any food. Pharaoh actually rewards Joseph for this correct interpretation of his dream. Of course, Pharaoh didn't know the interpretation either, but he trusted Joseph, and sure enough, this happened. And so Pharaoh takes Joseph out of jail and actually rises Joseph up to a position of power. You could say that Joseph ends up becoming sort of like the second in command in Egypt, where he becomes the person who oversees the storing of the goods during the time of feast, to be able to also oversee the disbursement of these goods during the time of famine. Joseph was not prepared to be imprisoned or interpret dreams, but he decided to be a little bit optimistic and pay attention and do the right thing. He wasn't prepared either to be a commander in Egypt, and yet that's where he found himself. This famine was so bad, in fact, that it also affected Joseph's family back in Israel. His family was so desperate and so without in this time that they actually took a journey from Israel all the way down to Egypt to be able to ask Pharaoh for some food. A lot of people were doing that at the time. An incredibly long journey, and they decide to do that. Joseph's brothers don't recognize him because his appearance has changed and it's been a while, but Joseph actually recognizes his brothers. He's faced with an interesting moment, an interesting opportunity that he gets to choose what he does in this moment and in this time. And what I want to do is take you to a little bit of a glimpse of this conversation. Genesis chapter 45, verses 4 through 8 says this. Then Joseph said to his brothers, again, they didn't know him. They didn't recognize him at this point. "Come close to me," Joseph said. And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here." What a crazy thing to tell his brothers, right? "Don't be angry because of what you did, because it was to save lives that God sent me here ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me the father to Pharaoh, Lord of his entire household, and ruler over all Egypt." What an amazing sort of unexpected circumstance that happens here. You could even call these moments unprecedented, right? I know that's a buzzword in this time, but what's going on here is crazy, unprecedented famine that was going on. Totally unprecedented that a Hebrew slave, former slave from Israel would be raised up to power in Pharaoh's household. That would never have happened in any other circumstance, and yet it happens. Yet Joseph gets used by God and allows this opportunity to happen. And he has this moment again, this choice where he gets to choose whether or not to help his brothers or whether or not to vindicate himself. His brothers deserved punishment, right? His brothers deserved a fate as bad as, if not worse than Joseph, because they sold their brother into slavery and he was left for dead, essentially, as far as they were concerned. Joseph had every right, every opportunity, and his brothers would have never even known it was him. But he chooses to reveal himself, to not reach out of anger or spite, but to help his brothers in the midst of it all. They didn't deserve compassion or assistance, and yet he does. In this moment in time, Joseph reveals himself. He decides to help his brothers and use his position as a manager in Egypt as he's remained faithful in the midst of a desperate situation to be able to help his family and so many others. Joseph really wasn't prepared for this moment either, was he? He didn't think he'd ever see his brothers again. He hadn't been thinking about this. What was he going to do? But he did the right thing. He actually decided to help his brothers in the midst of this. You might feel a little bit like Joseph today. You might feel a little bit abandoned and alone. You probably have a lot of unmet expectations right now as a graduating senior, a lot like Joseph had some crazy unmet expectations about being a brother, in fact, being the favored one in his father's household. He never imagined that this would happen to him, this incredible tragedy to an incredible triumph in the midst of it. One of the ways that you may have thought your senior year would go, maybe it didn't turn out the way you wanted it. You didn't sign up for this, and you really weren't prepared for it either, were you? Guess what? It really doesn't matter if you were prepared for this moment. And I'm not trying to be mean, but what I'm trying to say is you have found yourself in this day and time, really not because of your own choice, right? But what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do with the circumstances that you find yourself in? Here's something that you need to learn really quickly if you have not begun to learn this already. Life happens. My mom used to say, life just isn't fair, right? I would say that, and she'd go, well, it's not supposed to be fair, right? Life's not fair itself. And that's true. Things don't always go the way we like it. We're not promised amazing things. We're not even promised the next moment. We're not promised tomorrow, the Bible says. It's okay if things don't meet your expectations. It's going to happen a lot more in life, in fact. You might not get into college. You might not even get into the right college that you want to get in, and you might not even get into college, period. You might not get the job you want. You might not get the girl or the guy that you want. You might not get the car that you're looking for. It's okay to have dreams and hopes. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm going to ask you this. What are you going to do in this opportunity to grow? What are you going to do when you find yourself in situations like you are right now? You can sulk about it and be mad. You can blame other people, be vindictive. Or you can use this moment as an opportunity to grow and do something worthwhile. Be faithful to where you are right now. Get connected to God if you're not already connected, and let God direct you even right now. What are you doing with all the time that you have available right now, especially as school is finished, before you start the new next thing in your life? What have you been doing all the time that you've been quarantined? Are you merely playing online games, or are you doing something to better yourself? Are you wasting your time mindlessly, or are you making a difference? And I get it, right? There's a certain part of that you do need to check out and kind of just relax a little bit, and that's fine. But are you doing anything different? Are you growing in any kind of way? Or are you just sort of floating along? It's hard to grow. You got to choose to grow. Be faithful to where you are right now and let God do something in your life. Like Joseph, you didn't sign up for this. But like Joseph, stay faithful to God and let God use you even right now. Like me, we are going through some tragic circumstances. Maybe you even know someone that is sick or suffering with the coronavirus. But what will you do with the time that you have right now? Don't waste this time or this opportunity. Do something good for the glory of God. 5 or 10 years from now, you'll look back on this moment and this time, and I bet you're going to realize that it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. It wasn't as difficult as you made it out to be. It wasn't as desperate as you thought. Sure, it might have been hard to find some steak at the grocery store, right? Or maybe you ran out of toilet paper for a little bit, but it's not nearly as bad as we may have characterized it. The distance from this time, 5-10 years down the road, will tell you whether or not you wasted your time during this crisis or you chose to do something with it. Class of 2020, hindsight is 2020. Hindsight is 2020. Get some perspective and allow God to direct you even now. Even in these circumstances, trust God and follow Him in and through it all. What are you going to do with the adversity that's facing you, the quarantine that you may find yourself in, and the risk of infection from the coronavirus? Are you going to cower in fear, or are you going to trust God, take necessary precautions, and allow God to use you even in these times? My hope and my prayer for you is that you press through this adversity and unmet expectations and follow God in this time and beyond this time. You've been through a lot as a class, and you've endured it. Go with God, and God will see you through it. After all, hindsight is 2020. Amen.